The Senate Special Committee on Aging will come to order. Good morning, everyone. This hearing we're having today comes at a very critical time as Congress discusses how to get American workers back on their feet and to pull our economy out of the ditch. Over the last year, workers in every occupation, in every corner of the country, have felt the effects of the devastating economic recession created by COVID-19. Let's get this microphone up. Sorry about that. The COVID-19 pandemic has been devastating to every corner of the country and especially to workers. While the harm has not been contained to any one age group, the impact on older workers has been severe. As we all know, the threat posed by the virus is magnified for older adults as individuals ages 50 and over have accounted for 95% of all deaths. 95% of all deaths. Millions of older workers have had to make the impossible choice between continuing to go to work to pay their bills or staying home to protect their health and to protect their families. Many others simply saw their jobs disappear. For example, in Pennsylvania, the 12-month rolling average unemployment rate of workers aged 55 and older increased from 3.0 in February 2020 to 9.2% in February 2021. While the unemployment rate has declined since last summer, 1.7 million workers ages 55 and older are still unemployed nationwide. As we'll hear from our witnesses today, unemployment numbers don't tell the whole story. Hundreds of thousands of older workers fell out of the workforce altogether, giving up on finding a job or being forced to retire early. Fortunately, we're beginning to see light at the end of this very dark tunnel. The American Rescue Plan contained critical investments to defeat the virus and help families, including, just by way of example, an extension of expanded unemployment benefits and a $1,400 direct payment. Funding to help ensure employers are keeping workers safe and healthy in the workplace. And third, an historic investment in vaccine distribution. All of these are critical to helping older workers return to work safely. The American Rescue Plan was a huge step forward because there's still much more we need to do to, quote, build back better, as President Biden has said. I believe we must pass the President's American Jobs Plan to make investments in our nation's infrastructure that are long overdue. The investments in the American Jobs Plan will create millions of middle-class jobs, raise wages, and help workers develop the skills that will power economic growth for years to come. Older workers will benefit enormously from this investment. As older workers are looking to return to work safely, it's also more important than ever that Congress dismantle the barriers that have long made it more difficult for them to succeed in the workplace. One of the most significant of these barriers is age discrimination. That's why I reintroduced my bipartisan Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act, Senate Bill 880, along with Senators Grassley, Leahy, and Collins. This bipartisan bill will strengthen age discrimination protections and make it easier for older workers to seek justice in court. In addition to that, another bipartisan bill I was proud to introduce yesterday with the ranking member, as well as Senator Portman, Senator Cortez Masto. It's our Senior Care Act, which would allow seniors with disabilities to work while keeping essential Medicaid benefits. And today, Ranking Member Scott and I are also sending a letter to the Department of Labor calling on the department to specifically address the needs of older workers as our nation recovers from the pandemic. As we build a better economy, we must work together to ensure that older workers are included and prioritized every step of the way. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about these policies and others that will help guarantee that older workers help us lead the way to a stronger economic future. Before we begin, I want to remind committee members and witnesses to please keep remarks and questions to 5 minutes. The countdown timer can be viewed alongside with other participant windows on WebEx, as you can see. Following opening remarks, senators will ask questions based on seniority, and I ask that members have their cameras turned on a few minutes prior to their question. Ranking Member Scott, I'm pleased to turn it over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Casey, for holding this really important hearing, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today. It's certainly a very important topic and one that I am becoming more and more acquainted with personally as I talk to so many friends and family members as well as constituents who are really engaged in this new economy and are excited about that as our seniors re-engage at a high level of entrepreneurship. 22 million jobs were lost in March. Many states are still recovering. According to the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, our unemployment rate right now in South Carolina is about 5.2%. It's below the national average, but for our seniors, more than nationwide 10 million Americans ages 65 and older were employed. But by 2020 in July, we saw 1.1 million had lost their jobs. That is a major part of this epidemic that we are trying to stress the importance of re-engagement here during this hearing. And I thank Chairman Casey for doing such good work on bringing the focus back to the economics that so many seniors face going forward and the important work that we can do here today. The pandemic, however, did open a door for teleworking, and that could be great news for our senior population. Companies have realized the value of older workers as well. Michelin, who has its national headquarters in South Carolina, has initiatives for older workers, including wellness, training, and intergenerational mentoring, and phased retirement. According to the SBA, almost 51% of small business owners are over the age of 50. One of those entrepreneurs is Vera Gall, the owner of Oil and Vinegar in Greenville, South Carolina. Vera had a long and successful career teaching at a culinary institute before opening her own business, culinary store. Vera and her husband are now proud owners and business leaders making major contributions to their community. Every single senator should stop and embrace Vera's passion to pursue the dream. That is why I'm introducing the Golden Entrepreneurship Act. It is focusing on folks like Vera so that we can help encourage and motivate more successful entrepreneurs who are in their golden years. The legislation provides new training opportunities for senior entrepreneurs. It requires SBA to track the number of and the amount of loans provided to senior-owned businesses. Seniors also have tremendous opportunities in the gig economy. Scores of seniors work as independent contractors, seasonal workers, and freelancers. In a 2019 report by ADP Institute found that 30% of all contractors were 55 years or older. They participate in the gig economy in a very strong and powerful way. They enjoy incredible high levels of job satisfaction. South Carolina's own Theodosia, who supplements her retirement income by driving Uber, says that her flexibility and her independence that comes from being an independent contractor is really important to her. As Americans continue to work longer, we need to ensure that the federal government supports this workforce. That is why Chairman Casey and I, he just alluded to it, have sent a bipartisan letter to the Department of Labor on behalf of older workers. We need to advance policies that ensure that these amazing opportunities exist for our older Americans. Proposals like the PRO Act will dramatically hike the minimum wage. Those two specific areas can actually reduce the likelihood of success for our older Americans. The PRO Act would be devastating to drivers like Theodosia, who would lose that sense of independence as her status is reclassified. We should focus on time. We should focus our time and energy into issues where we can come together at the same table. I ask my colleagues to join me as we work together on behalf of our seniors who are still in the workforce. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. I want to, before I introduce our witnesses, I'll introduce 3 of our 4 witnesses. But before that, I want to acknowledge, I know earlier Senator Rick Scott was in the hearing. I want to acknowledge that he was present, as well as Senator Blumenthal and Senator Rosen. And what I'll try to do, as I mentioned earlier, because senators are in and out because of other commitments of time, especially other hearings. Many senators have not just one other hearing, but sometimes 3, all within the 9:30 to 11:30 window. So we'll acknowledge folks, and some will be able to stay and ask questions. Some will just be able to appear and listen for part of the hearing. But let's go to our witnesses just by way of introduction before we get to their testimony. First, I'm pleased to introduce Elizabeth White. Elizabeth is an author and advocate for solutions benefiting older adults facing uncertain work and financial insecurity. She worked in the nonprofit sector for many years and is also an entrepreneur. She's the author of 55 and Faking Normal, in which she shares her own experience with job loss and provides guidance to older workers facing similar hurdles. I want to thank Ms. White for being with us today and for sharing her expertise with the committee. Our second witness is Dr. Elise Gould from the Economic Policy Institute, so-called EPI. Dr. Gould is an economist whose work focuses on labor market trends, wages, and poverty in the United States. She's examined how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the labor force, and in particular, older workers. I want to thank Dr. Gould for being with us today and for sharing her expertise with the committee. And our third witness is Ramsey Alwyn. Ramsey is from the National Council on Aging, known by the acronym NCOA. She's the president and CEO of NCOA and has previously held leadership positions at multiple organizations for seniors. Ms. Alwyn, thank you for being with us today and for sharing your expertise. Finally, I'll turn to Ranking Member Scott to introduce our 4th witness. Ranking Member Scott.
Thank you, Chairman Casey. It is my pleasure to introduce today David Poston. David is the president and CEO of Palmetto Synthetics in King Street, South Carolina, and the vice chair of the National Textile Association. He is an entrepreneur, leader, and innovator, and I'm proud of the work he is doing in my home state. David was a founding partner of Palmetto Synthetics, which has distinguished itself in the fiber industry by providing high-quality plastic products. Notably, for the purposes of this hearing, his company employs a workforce of over 250 South Carolinians with an average age of over 50 years old. Way to go, David. I like that. David's testimony today is based on his experience as an entrepreneur and job creator. We'll hear about his manufacturing business has worked, how his manufacturing business has worked to hire, train, retain, and support older South Carolinians, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, David, for being with us today. And thank you for being a living, breathing model of what it means to actually do what the goal of this hearing is. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. We'll now turn to our witnesses. We'll begin with Elizabeth White. You may begin your testimony.
Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Scott, and honorable committee members, thank you so much for inviting me today. I want to speak to what happened to me during the Great Recession as an older worker, as I think it will speak to what many older workers are experiencing today under the pandemic. I was someone who was doing very well until I wasn't. I punched all the tickets, Harvard MBA, Master's in International Studies from Hopkins, undergraduate degree from Oberlin College. Until the Great Recession, of 2008, 2009, I had a career that I loved. I landed my dream job at the World Bank at 29. I was recruited from among 5,000 applicants. They took 2 Americans. I was one of them. In my 40s, I became a retail entrepreneur and won the National Retail Federation's Small Retailer of the Year. When the Great Recession hit, I was working 2 long-term consultancies that put me solidly in the 6 figures. Both organizations retrenched, and I lost both jobs over a 6-month period, taking my income to zero. I was not worried initially, given my experience and credentials. I had the kind of network where I would hear about jobs before they were even posted. But now in my mid-50s, I was not getting the traction I was used to. The few assignments I got were small editing jobs, teaching at UDC, paying a fraction of what I was used to earning. Weeks turned into months, then years, depleting my savings. I started noticing friends in the same boat, former high earners barely making ends meet. At a low point, I wrote an essay describing what it's like to land here, to feel like you're looking through a window at a world that you're no longer part of. The essay, published by Next Avenue, made its way to the PBS Facebook page and went viral. Thousands of people responded with "Me too," "This is my husband," "My sister," "My colleague," "My friend." How come we're not talking about this? I have the background to look at the data, and I was astonished by what I saw. I learned that the median retirement income the median retirement savings of near retirees 55 to 64 is $60,000. I learned that more than half of workers in their 50s are getting pushed out of their long-term full-time jobs, and that only 10% ever again get a job at that level and pay of the one they left. It's hard to believe that all these people just suddenly became incompetent. After my essay appeared, dozens of people started to write me their personal stories. We were all kind of looking for a way forward. There are lots of books on the retirement income crisis, but they're typically focused on how to avert this crisis for people who are in their 20s and 30s today. There was nothing for people who are living this crisis now. I wrote 55 underemployed and faking normal to fill this void. The second edition was picked up by Simon and Schuster, and I started getting invited to speak. My TEDx on my book now has nearly 2 million views. In my travels, I met displaced factory workers in Martin, Tennessee, and aged out senior executives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Their stories were surprisingly the same: lost jobs, depleted savings, homes in foreclosure, and marriage on the rocks. Shame, too, fear, anger, the American dream upside down. And today they have to worry about their health, too. And there is something Congress can do to make sure older workers are not left behind in the recovery. You can fight age bias in the workplace by passing PWADA. You can make sure that the Jobs Act specifically addresses the needs of older workers. You can extend basic worker protections to gig workers, and you can support older entrepreneurs. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I look forward to your questions.
Ms. White, thank you for your testimony. We're grateful you're with us today. Dr. Gould, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee for the invitation to participate in today's important hearing on supporting older workers amid the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. My name is Elise Gould. I'm a senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that analyzes the effects of U.S. economic policy on working families. Today, I would like to outline the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on older workers, how it compares to the Great Recession, and how we can build a stronger, more equitable economy going forward. This morning, I have 5 points. 1, The U.S. economy faced devastating job losses of the pandemic recession and continues to face a significant employment shortfall. 2, older workers were not spared in this recession. Millions of older workers lost their jobs. 3, older workers lost employment in greater numbers in this recession than in the Great Recession. 4, older workers were hit harder by the pandemic itself and were among the least likely to be able to work from the safety of their homes. 5, the economy requires continued assistance from policymakers to ensure that the economy comes back strong, and the recovery provides greater economic security and opportunity for all workers, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, gender, educational attainment, and where they work. Go back to my first point. While a solid 916,000 jobs were added in March, the strongest job growth we've seen since the initial bounce back faded last summer, the labor market is still down 8.4 million jobs from its pre-pandemic level in February 2020. In addition, thousands of jobs would have been added each month over the last year without the pandemic recession. We count how many jobs would have been created if the recession hadn't hit. We are now short 11 million jobs since February 2020. It could take more than a year to dig out of the total employment shortfall. My second point, older workers were far from spared in the COVID recession. Between March and April 2020, 5.7 million workers, 55 and up, lost their jobs. Older workers experienced a bit of a rebound last summer, but then lost ground through the fall. March 2021 was the first month since October 2020 that older workers saw positive gains in employment. Older workers are still down 2.1 million jobs since February 2020. And considering population growth over the last year, older workers are facing a job shortfall of over 2.7 million jobs. My third point, the labor market outcomes were far worse for older workers in this recession as compared to the Great Recession. In particular, if we look at women ages 55 to 64, they saw a much larger employment drop in the most recent recession than in the prior one, than what they saw in the Great Recession. This could be due in part to additional caregiving responsibilities. They may have left the labor force to care for elderly parents who left their nursing home or assisted living facility. They could have left the labor force to care for other ill family members, or even to help take care of grandchildren when the schools shuttered. My fourth point is that over 500,000, or nearly 95% of the deaths from COVID-19 were among those 55 years and older. It would be no surprise then that many older workers not only lost their jobs, but opted out of the workforce for fears of their own health and safety. This may be particularly true for older workers of color who have been hit harder from both the health and economic aspects of the pandemic. These trends were exacerbated by the fact that older workers were less likely than many other age groups to be able to telework before the pandemic hit. Not only about 1/5 of the current workforce, now only about 1/5 of the current workforce is teleworking. What that means is that nearly 80% of workers are physically going to work. Not only does that include many older workers, but it's likely that millions of younger workers who cannot telework may be putting older families at risk going to work themselves. I'll conclude by saying that policymakers have a role in reversing these devastating trends. In order for the economy to grow back quickly and stronger than before, policymakers should make sure the recovery hits all corners of the labor market. This means putting significant investments in policies that meet the pressing social needs the COVID-19 pandemic made so visible, and that lead to greater economic security and opportunity for workers, including but not limited to physical infrastructure, caregiving needs for young and old, paid leave, and expanded unemployment insurance. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Gould. Ms. Alwyn, you may begin your testimony. Thank you.
Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. At the National Council on Aging, we're guided by our equity promise that aging well should be a right, not a privilege. And for millions of Americans, aging well means being able to work up to and beyond traditional retirement age. As longevity climbs and Americans struggle to save for retirement, work is essential to affording a longer life. This is especially true for older women and people of color who age into higher rates of poverty. And since 1968, NCOA has been a proud sponsor of the Department of Labor's Senior Community Service Employment Program, or CSEP, which trains and places disadvantaged older adults into work. Today, we provide CSEP services in 11 states and Puerto Rico, including Georgia, New York, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. This has given us clear insight into the tremendous value of older workers. Over the past year, these older workers have felt the devastating impact on their employment status. As of March, over 1.7 million older workers remained unemployed. Between August and January, 1.1 million workers left the workforce entirely. These are older adults that opted out due to the frustrations and the struggles. This drop in employment among older workers was even greater among older workers of color, twice that experienced by whites. Older women were among those most likely to lose their job or leave the labor market as well. And older workers have struggled with long-term unemployment of 27 weeks or more at greater rates than their younger counterparts. Over half of jobless older adults in March were long-term unemployed. If we are not intentional about targeting our policy solutions, the economic impact of these job losses will position too many older adults to age into poverty. So today, I'd like to share 3 potential solutions. First, we must strengthen federal age discrimination protections. Ageism is the last socially acceptable form of discrimination in our society, and it remains stubbornly ingrained in the workplace. It's time to treat it like every other unlawful bias. Senator Casey's Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act is a great start, and we applaud him and Senator Collins for the bipartisan effort. We also support legislation such as the Protect Older Job Applicants Act, championed by Representative Sylvia Garcia. On top of prohibiting birth dates on job applications, we recommend banning questions related to graduation dates and salary history. Second, we need to expand job placement and training services. Older workers have been left behind by public workforce programs, which view them as too challenging for job training and placement, fail to recognize part-time and flexible work as measurable success, and lack the targeted assistance and wraparound services older adults need. The exception is CSEP, and we should ensure it receives significant investments to restore the erosion in funding over the past decade and enable the program to respond to the challenges of today. We know the program works. Participants who secure work earn more in their first year than the annual training costs, and 7 in 10 remain on the job a year later. Yet current appropriations are $60 million less than the funding nearly 3 decades ago. As such, CSEP is currently serving far less than 1% of those eligible. At a minimum, fiscal year 22 appropriation should equal at least the $480 million approved in last year's reauthorization with bipartisan support. In proposals to expand and create new job training programs, older workers must be included. We applaud the president's call for a substantial investment in workforce development, and a recovery investment in CSEP of at least $500 million should be included. And older workers should be explicitly listed as eligible and prioritized for expanded new workforce development programs. When addressing historic inequities certain populations face in accessing job training and placement opportunities, older adults cannot be left behind. Third, we must ensure equitable access to quality jobs. The Federal Work Opportunity Tax Credit rewards employers that hire individuals from specific groups who have faced significant barriers. NCOA endorsed prior legislation to expand WOTC to include low-income workers, and we believe it's needed again. We also endorse Senator Casey's Disability Employment Incentive Act, which would extend WOTC to individuals with disabilities. And job quality opportunities also mean flexible work arrangements as well. So we look forward to working with Ranking Member Scott on his legislation to support older entrepreneurs. Of course, we're mindful of the many barriers individuals face in taking full advantage of entrepreneurship, gig, and flexible work. And for those arrangements to be available, we support wraparound services, access to benefits, and income supports. In conclusion, we need increased federal leadership. We need an older workers bureau, housed at the Department of Labor that could lead a focused effort across federal agencies to maximize older adults' workforce participation. And that would be good for older adults, employers, society, and our economy. As Mr. Hawkins, an Air Force veteran and successful CSEP participant working again, sums it up for us, I now live life to the fullest as compared to just existing. And that's the power of work at every age. Thank you again, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Ms. Allen, thanks very much. And finally, We conclude our witness testimony with Mr. Poston.
Thank you, Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee. My name is David Poston, and I'm president of Palmetto Synthetics in Kingstree, South Carolina. We're a textile manufacturing company that produces specialty synthetic fibers for a wide variety of applications like automotive carpet, military uniforms, performance apparel, and a wide variety of industrial uses. And we ship that fiber all over the world. We started Palmetto Synthetics in 1998 with 5 employees and one 50,000 square foot building with the goal of producing the highest quality specialty fiber in the world. And it was a greenfield startup, like literally in a soybean field. Today, we have 250 employees working in 375,000 square feet, and we produce more specialty fiber for a wider variety of applications than any other company in the world. We operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I'm blessed and thankful for our success, which is a result of our talented and dedicated employees. Today, 50% of our production employees are over 50 years old, and 70% of our employees are over 40. Furthermore, 100% of our upper management is over the age of 50, as well as 90% of our middle management. We actually employ more managers in their 70s than in their 20s and 30s. And we do this because we found while tracking attendance statistics a few years ago, we noticed that employees over the age of 40 had much better attendance records than younger associates, and older employees were less often late. They didn't leave before the end of their shift and were our most reliable workers. And since an employee who's late or absent has to be covered by a full-time person from a different shift, the teams with older employees, excuse me, translated to less overtime and higher quality production. We also discovered older workers were a valuable asset to mentor and set strong work examples for younger employees as we build a workforce for the future. Our production jobs are not strenuous. A majority of our employees are monitoring control panels for our production lines. Without the jobs being physically taxing, we make an effort to recruit an older workforce to improve employee reliability and production. Over several years, as our workforce has aged, we continue to notice increased production and efficiency. So we actively recruit older production and management employees today. Like all other sectors of the economy, the American textile industry was especially hard hit by the pandemic. In just a span of a few weeks in March, we went from 100% capacity utilization to less than 15. In the face of countless lost orders and idle production lines, though, we were able to retool our production line to help with the COVID response. We started producing fiber for COVID testing swabs and antimicrobial fibers for medical gowns. During this difficult period, we were able to keep 100% of our employees on the payroll because of the PPP loan we received. I literally do not know where my company would be today without the lifeline we received from the PPP loan. It saved most, if not all, of our jobs. And I want to thank Senator Scott for his leadership on this program to ensure that small businesses in this nation, like mine, had the resources they need to weather the storm. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we implemented several social distancing practices on the production floor, like mask requirements. We conducted temperature checks at the start of every shift to ensure our workers' health and safety. In 2020, we did have 4 seniors in management and 12 senior manufacturing employees choose to retire. But as the economy reopens, we will recruit older associates to replace those recent retirees. Hiring, training, and retaining older workers is the key to successful and efficient workforce at Palmetto Synthetics. Because of modern technology, manufacturing and production jobs are no longer out of reach of older Americans. Meanwhile, more and more employers are discovering the unique advantages of older workers in the workplace. to mentor younger workers, retain institutional knowledge, and increase reliability. So again, thank you, Chairman Casey, Ranking Member Scott, and the rest of the committee, and for allowing me to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Boston, thanks very much for your testimony. We'll move to questions. But before I do that, as I mentioned, some senators will be in and out. I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge them when they've appeared. And Senator Collins is with us. I see Senator Collins. Great to be with her, and Senator Warnock as well. So let me start with my round of questions, and I'll try to follow my own guidance with regard to staying within my time. I wanted to start with Dr. Gould. Doctor, in your testimony, you described in detail how older workers have suffered as a result of the economic downturn, really a jobs crisis produced by the pandemic. Your testimony also made clear that while labor market conditions are improving, we still have a ways to go to erase the losses, the millions of jobs that were lost. I believe it's critical that we make the types of large-scale investments in our nation's infrastructure and workforce that the president has called for. And I think all of us would agree that inaction, doing nothing, is not an option. The scale of our response, I believe, needs to reflect the scale of the challenge before us. So, Dr. Gould, can you speak about the direct investments in infrastructure and the workforce, the benefits that we can derive from those investments? But in particular, can you talk about how those investments could benefit older workers?
Yes, thank you for your question, Senator. Absolutely, those investments in public services are of utmost importance to older workers. Like all workers, would benefit from a stronger infrastructure. Particular components of that infrastructure investment, like broadband, would disproportionately keep older workers safer, as it enables them to work from the safety of their homes. Those caregiving investments, a very important component, again, of our infrastructure, will help older workers as caregivers, as well as older workers needing care themselves. Increasing labor standards in that caregiving infrastructure that I've seen as part of that legislation will raise wages and improve working conditions. And making sure that we encourage employers to have a neutral stance towards unionization efforts will also reap the benefits of a unionized workforce in the improved delivery of those services. We need to address the health and safety concerns head on, making sure older workers are protected in their workplaces from COVID, meeting best practices for infectious disease standards, PPE, and the like. This will provide vital protections for older workers. Those are some examples I'd see.
Thanks very much for your testimony and for your answer to that question. I'm going to move next, before my time is up, to Ms. Alwyn regarding a letter that I received from Bonnie Marcus, who's a Pennsylvanian. I'm holding in my hand the letter she sent me, and I'll, for formal purposes, introduce this letter to the record and hereby do so by reference to it. But Bonnie Marcus is from Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. That's in the southeastern corner of our state. She worked for her employer for years doing highly skilled work. She became a victim of age discrimination and was fired along with several colleagues. She had to fight through the court system for years just to get justice. Here's what she said in pertinent part in her letter, quote, "It was so painful to be thrown away like something that was used up and not needed. I really hurt from that, and I felt a profound loneliness, because so many of my thoughts centered around work and how to have my whole group be successful. Now that was gone," unquote. Cases like this is why we introduced the legislation I referred to earlier, to fight back against age discrimination. So Ms. Alwyn, based upon the testimony you gave, can you speak about the different ways that age discrimination can both undermine older workers and why, secondly, why it's critical that we strengthen these protections?
Well, thank you. Age discrimination can take many forms, and thank you for sharing that painful but all too universal story that older adults experience. Age discrimination can be less favorable treatment of older adults in the hiring processes and in employment, which can lead to involuntary retirement and inability to change jobs. It can lead to underemployment, the underutilization of workers, and longer periods of unemployment. Despite the 1967 Age Discrimination in Employment Act, or ADEA, which forbids discrimination against those 40 and older, many individuals, nearly 2/3 of Americans aged 45 and older, have either seen or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. According to the 2019 Ageism in the Workplace study, the number of age-related discrimination charges filed with employers to the EEOC by workers aged 65 and older have doubled from 1990 to 2017. It's imperative that we restore and reinforce age discrimination policies, and PAWADA would be critical to that. PAWADA would restore the age discrimination employment protections Congress initially intended. It's been over a decade since the Supreme Court decision undermined the ADEA and older workers, and we shouldn't have to wait any longer to see their rights restored. So thank you for your leadership in reintroducing. With the bipartisan support for PAWADA and the president's call for stronger discrimination protections generally, we hope it's now finally time to reinstore age discrimination policies.
Ms. Alwyn, thanks for your testimony and the answer to the questions. I'll turn to Ranking Member Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note that we have the former chairwoman Collins with us this morning. Chair Collins, if you would like to go next, I'm happy to defer to you. I'll go ahead and continue then. Mr. Paulston, thank you for being with us this morning. And you said some very interesting and frankly illuminating comments about the importance of having senior management that's a little more seasoned, I'll say it that way. Can you speak to me about the vital role that experience and your management's team, as well as some of the things that you mentioned was timeliness, attendance, overtime? All those things are benefits the company, but it frankly benefits the end user, the person that you're marketing to, that they are in a better position to have a more competitive product at a more affordable price, more reasonable price, because your workforce is so synergistic. Is that an accurate depiction of why your focus on seniors in the workforce is so obvious?
Yes, Senator, that's very accurate. Seniors are really our lifeblood. I think there's a shortage of manufacturing employees in all markets today. And if we relied on only younger people, I'm not sure how any manufacturing company today could survive. We have to, this is maybe a different discussion, but we have to somehow educate the public that manufacturing jobs aren't like manufacturing jobs in the 1930s in a steel mill. You're not carrying 50-pound bags of concrete. This is jobs where you're monitoring control panels, and you can do it very, very late in life. In fact, you probably get better at it because you're wiser. So again, having a predominantly senior workforce has certainly helped our efficiency and quality and on-time delivery. And again, I'm just not sure what we would do without that.
Well, two things you said earlier, and I do want to continue that discussion on the transformation that's happened in manufacturing. I visited dozens of plants by this point, and most places I go, the environment is very clean. The environments are easy workplaces. You have AC. I mean, you could literally, the areas that they're working in, you look at this old model that we think is manufacturing, and you look at the reality of manufacturing, and as simple as it is, people think of a sweaty, hot place without any normal AC ventilation. The truth is that's just ridiculous. If you've been to a recent manufacturing location, they are pristine clean. You could scramble eggs on the floor and be fine eating them. I mean, literally that clean. I've been all over the country, and frankly, I've been stunned by the amazing transformation of the workplace. Let me ask you a question. Are other folks in the industry following your lead on our senior workforce, or not?
I think they almost have to be, Senator. I think it with the lack of people who are willing to do manufacturing jobs, I think almost all companies have to lean on a senior workforce. And again, I don't know how any other company would notice what we noticed, that their attendance is better and their work is better. I would think other manufacturing companies especially would have to be following that lead. And I'm not suggesting that we let it, but it was something that we certainly noticed.
Absolutely. Now, I want to make sure that people understand that my recommendation was not necessarily to scramble the eggs on the floor and try that out. I was only a suggestion that things have gotten a lot better, just in case someone missed that.
You would greatly upset our VP of manufacturing if you tried that.
Yes, sir. Ms. White, 55 and faking normal. I love the title, frankly, and love your passion and your energy. The platforms today, the gig economy provides our seniors with the type of flexibility that they want, the type of certainty that they decide on. The workforce of the future will have the gig economy as their reality. Can you explain the benefit of using the platform economy for retired workers who might, frankly, want to stay active or make a little supplement to their retirement income and or make it a full-time go?
Thank you, Senator Scott. I think the gig economy is actually a mixed bag. You know, on the one hand, it does offer some flexibility. They do talk about, workers. It's their entrepreneurial spirit that drives them there. But actually, I think what's happening, and this goes back to some of the points that were made earlier, if you have half of the people who are in their 50s pushed out of the job market, pushed out of their jobs, and then only 10% ever again get a job that pays at a level commensurate with the job they left. This means that these are people who then become desperate and they are looking for any kind of job. I think that that person that we see sometimes bagging groceries at Whole Foods is not there because they want to be. So some people do I think enjoy the flexibility of gig work, but then gig work, it's often it's low pay, it is no benefits, it is no worker protections, and so I think that if it is here to stay, and it is right now, it's already a third of workers are what they call employer independent. They think over the next decade it's going to be half of the workers are going to be in the sharing economy, then I think we should give them the same protections as we give other workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. It certainly is important. I know that my time is out, so I won't make this won't belong the discussion. Will note that the studies have reflected that about 90% of the gig workforce, those independent contractors, enjoy the flexibility, the certainty that they are setting for themselves as a part of the workforce. Obviously, there are folks who are doing the jobs because they've lost other income, other opportunities for employment. So there's a mixed bag, and we'll have to continue that discussion perhaps in the next round. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. As I acknowledged earlier, we have senators that are in and out. Some are able to appear for a brief period of time. Others are able to stay for questions. So we've got many senators have multiple hearings going on. I want to acknowledge that Senator Gillibrand was with us a little bit earlier. And so for the next two rounds of question, we'll go to Senator Kelly and then Senator Collins.
Yes, so Senator Casey, my understanding is that Ms. Alwyn is on too. I don't see everybody here.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Hello,
Yes.
Senator.
My first question is for Ms. Alwyn. So good morning. Sorry I showed up a little bit late here. Ms. Alwyn, so overall the economy is beginning to recover. We had incredibly strong economic growth here this last quarter. Projection for the year is rather shockingly good. But we're talking about older workers here. Nearly 2 million people age 55 and above are out of work across the country. And we know based on historical data that it's likely going to be harder for them to re-enter the workforce than it will be for younger folks. Are there employer incentives or actions that we could take to encourage businesses to hire and retain older workers?
Well, thanks so much for asking, Senator. We have learned from the historical records on workforce trends and older adults. They're often the longest in the rehiring, getting rehired at half or a third of previous wages. We saw that in the Great Recession, and we've seen that over time. So we're particularly concerned and do want to invest in strategies that would help best position them with the right job training and placement. Additionally, it is important to incentivize employers. And I talked about the WOTC as an opportunity that could be expanded to prioritize low-income older workers as a significant population that has been left behind, has experienced barriers. And this could be a tax credit that employers would receive if they prioritize this population as well as other special populations. And we think it's a win-win ultimately, because as you heard, older workers are incredible collaborators, creativity, and compassion, and a range of uniquely human skills are brought to bear when you have an older worker in your workforce. So incentivizing with the tax code is a fabulous way to ensure older workers are not left behind.
Well, thank you, Ms. Allen. And for Ms. White, Arizona has a state plan on aging. And this plan was informed by a series of focus groups of older individuals around the state. Computer literacy was brought up several times, and one respondent said that, this is a quote, that older citizens who must remain in the workforce require specific and often intensive training in computer usage, and computers are a huge stumbling block for many. I know we've probably all experienced that as we try to get our parents situated with technology. Yeah, I've heard from Arizona seniors on my seniors advisory group about the difficulties assessing online vaccine appointments. Nationwide, survey upon survey says that older workers don't feel they have the skills to keep up with the technology required in their jobs, and they aren't being offered the training that they need. As technology advances, how do we make sure that these workers are not left behind?
I think it's important to not lump all seniors into sort of one monolith. That we're talking about a 40-year age span, and that we have seniors who are actually quite competent at technology or could rise to the occasion. We saw with remote work, for example, where in April of last year, like 75% of the workforce was working remotely, that seniors actually who were working were able to get on board. So I think it is really that what I saw in the jobs plan is where it is assumed that these programs will benefit seniors, whether it is in the area of the technology, whether it is training, whether it is investment. I think that in this early outline, older adults are not mentioned specifically. I saw one reference in there to, I think it was aging relatives was the only reference I saw in the jobs plan to older adults. So I think that the what is recommended in there will also serve older adults, but we have to, on the technology side, but we have to be very specifically targeted, and we have to be very specifically in the plan named. So it's not enough to say that there is this technology program and assume in the jobs bill that older adults will be included. So I think what's there is robust and muscular, and just to carve out so that we are also included. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White, and thank you, Ms. Allen. Appreciate your testimony. Yield back.
Thanks, Senator Kelly. And before turning to Senator Collins, as the ranking member indicated, Senator Collins is a former chair of the committee. And I do want to thank her for her co-sponsorship over, not just recently, but over a number of years on the bill that several of us made reference to. everything, as folks know in Washington, has some kind of acronym. This acronym is PAWADA, but if you don't know the acronym, it's the Protecting Older Workers Against Discrimination Act. It's Senate Bill 880. So, Senator Collins, thanks very much, and we turn to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I can't pronounce the acronym, but I'm wholeheartedly in favor of the bill and appreciate your leadership on it, and am grateful to be the lead Republican with you as we try to get this bill enacted. I want to direct my question to Mr. Poston and Ms. Alwyn this morning. But before I do so, Mr. Poston, I want to tell you that you gladdened my heart when you talked about the PPP loan and the difference that it made to you. I was one of the 4 chief architects of that bill. You're right that Senator Scott was a strong supporter, as well as our chairman. And I'm just delighted to know that it was the lifeline that we intended for your employees. So let me turn to my question. I have 2 people who are very close to me, women who in their 50s, one was a vice president of a bank, one was a vice president of a college, and both of them lost their jobs when a new president came in and essentially fired all of the senior management and brought in his own team, both at the college and at the bank. Each of these women had worked there for several years and had done very well, were in their mid-50s. What their experience in each case was that when they searched for new jobs, they could not find employers who were willing to hire them at anywhere close to the comparable salaries that they had previously received, because they could hire younger people much more cheaply, even though they were getting a lesser skill level, a lesser judgment level. So, Mr. Poston, I'm going to start with you. You've clearly recognized that older workers bring reliability, judgment, and abilities that sometimes younger workers haven't had the time to develop yet, and that the trade-off can clearly be worth it, even if you're paying them a little more. But that's not the experience that a lot of people who lose their jobs in their 50s find. How can we encourage employers to recognize, as you have, the advantages of hiring older workers?
That's a really good question, Senator. I wish I had the answer. I actually don't understand why you would not look for an older workforce today. You know, I think 20 or 30 years ago, when you started a job, you worked for that company for your whole career. So if you were 50 or 55 or older, a company might see you as too close to retirement age. Well, now we can hire a 55-year-old person. They may have 20 more years in the workplace. So we see it as a way to capitalize on that person's experience, and not only for the jobs we hire them for, but also to mentor a younger workforce. So I'm not really sure what the answer would be there. It's certainly not something that I understand or that we do. I'm not sure why you would shun, to me, being of the same age, a 55-year-old person's pretty young. So I don't really quite understand it. And let me finish by saying again that I wouldn't be sitting here today probably without that PPP loan. So again, I really, really appreciate that. It has saved every one of my jobs.
That's wonderful to hear. And thank you for sharing your experience with older workers. I hope it inspires other employers. Ms. Alwyn, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you for your leadership on PWADA, and enforcing age discrimination protections are critical first and foremost. But also I'd say to employers, step back and look at the overarching economy. The 50+ market, what we call the longevity economy, has a direct spend of $7.6 trillion annually. This is a market that's buying your products and services. To be in touch with their consumer desires, their pain points, you need a workforce reflective of your consumer. And so tapping into that experience, understanding that value of experience, bringing it to bear on your offerings as a leader in industry is critical to your success. So including older workers in your workforce is truly a competitive advantage.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Collins. I know we have some senators that may be going back and forth, as I mentioned earlier. So what I'll do now is I'll start a second round of questions. I'll begin. Ranking Member Scott may have questions as well, and then we'll see where we are when other senators are moving back and forth. But I wanted to go back to Ms. White for a question, and I was particularly moved by your testimony as someone who had the experience you had and was able to take the time to write about it and to provide guidance to so many Americans who have experienced job loss and have been challenged in some of the ways that you outlined. I wanted to ask you about, obviously, the topic of age discrimination in the workplace that we've been talking about this morning, but also the need to make sure that all workplaces are welcoming of workers of all ages. In your written testimony, you talked about the need to tackle age bias in the workplace, so older workers are not unfairly forced out of their jobs, or frankly, to ensure that they're not denied opportunities that they would deserve. This is critically important that we strengthen both legal protections for older workers, but also make clear to employers that no amount of age discrimination is acceptable. I'd ask you, Ms. White, to just, if you can tell us a little more about why you think it's important to both to strengthen the protections for older workers, but also the importance of employers not just refraining from discriminating, but fully embracing, as Mr. Poston and others have, fully embracing what older workers bring to the workplace, the value, the benefit of those workers in various workplaces.
Thank you, Senator Casey. I think one thing to think about is today, the worker who is 55 years and older is already a quarter of the workforce. And over the next decade, they're going to be a third of the workforce. So it's not an insignificant group. Ramsey has already talked about the $8.3 trillion that the over 50 market is spending. And we have a situation where if people who are pushed out of the workforce are not able to again get jobs, as somebody said to me, I don't have to trade my 4-year-old Chevy in every year. I don't have to shop at Starbucks to get a coffee. I can take it in my thermos. So this point about how much we're spending as we are a significant driver of the economy, I think is one point. The other point is to start to look at the potential pressure on public finances. Teresa Ghilarducci, labor economist and retirement security expert, estimates that with the way we're going, that half of people who are now 55, by the time they get to be 65, are going to be living in poverty or near poverty conditions. And this is not a pesky little boomer problem. We don't have, even for Generation X or for millennials, they don't have pensions. They're facing uncertain work. They're facing escalating cost in housing, healthcare, and all the rest of it. So boomers, we are just the first who are living longer, but this is going to be the future. And so because we're the first generation to live as long as we are, then we're, at this place where we don't have rules yet. We don't have supportive legislation yet. We don't have many role models. My fellow witness here from South Carolina, I'm so excited about the company because this is a role model. And I'd like to see the federal government use its purchasing power when contracting with companies to actually start to look at how are they doing in terms of retaining and recruiting and advancing older workers. What kind of investment? How are they leveraging mature talent? That as you are deciding as a country, as we're deciding who we are going to do business with, that be one of the things that we also consider. I am less interested at this point in the laggard companies. I'd rather get behind a company like this in South Carolina, have other people, other companies understand what they're doing, um, convening companies that are on the forward edge like this of hiring older workers, understand the value. How do you um, include incentives? So maybe there are wage offsets, et cetera, to help the companies that are already there to do more. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And with the ranking member's indulgence, I'll lunge back into round one questions. Senator Braun is here. Senator Braun?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. COVID has, I think, given us a big wake-up call about another looming issue that drives our trillion-dollar deficits annually. And I think if there is a silver lining, it's forcing us to look at many things that we avoid here. I'm interested and try to keep your answers to maybe a minute or just a little more, because I'd like to hear from each witness. The big elephant in the room is Medicare, its high cost, and Social Security. And for anybody that's a boomer, retired, nearing retirement, the program's in jeopardy. Medicare Trust Fund, I think, gets completely depleted now in 5.5 years. It's 2031 or two for Social Security. I'm going to ask each one of you, because the variables are fairly simple, it's just tough to keep Social Security solvent. Do you think we need to raise taxes, raise the retirement age, or means test? I'd love to hear your opinions, because if we don't get the political will soon to start doing something about it, it's going to be here before we know it. And actuarially, we've known it for a long time. Raise taxes, raise the retirement age, or means tests. Whoever wants to jump in on that doozy first, go ahead.
It is such a doozy that I'm going to sit it out because I would actually be, I have be speculating, and I don't want that on the record. I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Respect that. Anyone else?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer your question. Thank you, Senator. As we know, Social Security and Medicare are essential lifelines for older workers. We've already heard statistics discussed about how many may be in poverty. And Social Security is one of the #1 poverty reducers we have in this country. So I'd maybe, as not a Social Security expert, but rather a workforce expert, I'd say that maybe one other option I'd put on your list is to increase the income that provides that payroll taxes into that system. As we've had growing wage inequality, a smaller share of wages are actually provided in that payroll tax. So we could go the other direction and increase the solvency in that way.
And that would be in the category of raising taxes. And I think that's a valid subset of that variable as well. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, and Senator, those are two very important social insurance programs for older adults. And we really believe in strengthening those programs. A piece of the puzzle is making sure people can work as long as they want and need to so that they can delay claiming that Social Security benefit. 8% each year they delay increases their benefit, but also means they continue to contribute those payroll taxes that can help us with the solvency. And addressing these challenges in terms of older workers that want and need to continue to work and get that employer-sponsored insurance when it comes to healthcare can also help in terms of delaying enrollment in Medicare. You know, there was an interesting analysis by the Commonwealth Fund last October. The cost to public programs and to older adults themselves when job losses are premature and retirement starts are significant. The analysis demonstrates if half of the pandemic-related job losses among older workers, roughly 500,000, are among those with employer-sponsored insurance and they have to transition over to Medicare, it could increase Medicare spending by more than $4 billion in a single year. So it just reinforces the need for today's conversation and leadership at the federal level to help the older workers that want and need to continue to work to do so for their own retirement security and for the solvency of our programs.
Thank you. Well said. I think there's one other potential opinion out there. Go ahead.
I'm not sure that was pretty tough to follow there. I'm not, I think I agree. I'm not sure I have the answer, and I certainly am not going to masquerade as an economist. So,
Well,
I'm not sure.
That's and I think that would be an answer that many would have because it's so complicated. I'm going to end with this. Medicare is the biggest driver, and I'm probably the most vocal senator on trying to reform healthcare in general. We need the help of retirement groups to help individuals like me that have made it work in the private sector by finding transparency, getting your employees engaged in their own well-being. So when they get to retirement age, they can enjoy it and be healthy. And I'd love to continue the conversation with anybody that's interested. I did that 13 years ago. And when I resigned as CEO and CFO of my company, and still these 2 years have not had a premium increase. Transparency, competition, getting rid of the barriers to entry, and getting healthcare consumers engaged in their own well-being helps government paid for healthcare and the private sector. Love to engage with anybody further if you're interested in that topic. Good talking to you today.
Thank you, Senator Braun. And I'll turn back to Ranking Member Scott. I know that Senator Warnock has appeared in the hearing and was here earlier. As I said, senators are juggling. So unless Senator Warnock has a question, I'll turn to Ranking Member Scott.
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume that I see Senator Warnock. I assume he does not have questions at this point. Ms. White, you wrote in your book that the shared economy offers us plus 50 workers opportunities to supplement our incomes by renting out our assets, and not just our homes and cars, but also our time, skills, accumulated knowledge, and experiences. From your book, I enjoyed reading. Can you just expound upon the importance of having seniors re-engage in the economy and or supplement income by figuring out their place in the marketplace, especially from a platform perspective?
Thank you, Senator Scott.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things I wanted to do in my book was to offer older adults options. And I definitely think that the gig economy is one option. I sort of look at it as how do you create an interesting casserole of work? So I have a number of friends, for example, who are empty nesters and who are renting a room in their home, and this is a way that they are making money. What has happened now with the pandemic, they don't want all those strangers in their house, and so that as an income avenue disappeared. So I see that the gig economy is here to stay. I think what we need to do is just make sure that it offers the same kind of worker protections as other work. It's not about like making it go away. It's not going away. But if you know, right now, uh, they even some of them, Uber, I know, and I think it was Lyft as well, lobbied for their workers to not get the pandemic unemployment. So there those kinds of things that I think are not actually worker friendly. I think the narrative about the gig work, where they talk about, you know, it's for your entrepreneurial spirit, etc., is a little bit of a marketing, you know, game. So since it's going to be half the economy's jobs over the next decade,
Yes,
let's
ma'am.
make it work for everybody. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I will note that one of the beauties of the pandemic, there aren't many beauties in a pandemic, but one of the beauties in the pandemic was forcing us to reevaluate and then recalibrate unemployment for those folks who are 1099 and independent contractors. Unfortunately, because of the fact that the pandemic was not brought on by any company or any employee, we changed the way that we saw unemployment and did include those Uber drivers and all the 1099 worker, independent contractors. Something else you say in your book that I think actually speaks to that point as it relates to funding and bridging towards retirement is you may be able to piece together enough income to put off filing for early Social Security and avoiding reducing your ultimate benefit. One of the points that I like in that comment is the importance, perhaps, Chairman, for a future hearing is around income insecurity, as well as the importance of focusing on the buildup in your 401ks. I know that in South Carolina and around the country, it is not uncommon for someone to have 1 year of income in their retirement accounts, and 1 year of income simply will not make 15 to 20 years in retirement comfortable. And one of the reasons why I really appreciate Ms. White's comments that I quoted from there is because of the importance of us focusing on the importance of financial literacy, especially in the golden years, and perhaps even the necessity of pre-planning in the 40s and 50s to help us to prevent too many folks with too few dollars in their retirement accounts. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to have a discussion about that. But I think Ms. White's quote reinforces the fact that there are too many folks getting closer to retirement who have to make a strong and tough decision about perhaps taking Social Security earlier because they need the income, as opposed to being able to delay that and getting a full benefit. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the extra round of questions, and I look forward to sticking around for another one.
Ranking Member Scott, thanks very much. I was going to move, based upon our senators now, I was going to move to close unless, Ranking Member Scott, you had additional questions.
No, sir, you go right ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I want to thank our witnesses for both your testimony and your insights today and for appearing at this hearing. We know that every corner of our country has been touched by this terrible pandemic, and every family has been affected in some way. We cannot leave older workers behind as the economy recovers. Indeed, these workers must play a central role in driving it forward, and many of you provided insight and testimony about the value of older workers today in our economy. The American Rescue Plan made some great strides towards ensuring that all workers have access to a vaccine and that they can return to a safe workplace. Now I believe Congress should enact the American Jobs Plan to spur economic growth and create millions of good-paying jobs to benefit all Americans. But we also have to remove the obstacles that have long stood in the way of workers. And one of those big obstacles, one of those big barriers, of course, is discrimination, age discrimination. That's why we need to pass the Protect Your Older Workers Against Discrimination Act without delay. It's bipartisan, and I'm grateful for the support that we have. There's much work to do, but I believe working together, we can meet the moment and protect older workers. I look forward to the continued work of the committee, and I'll turn to Ranking Member Scott for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for investing your time and your expertise in this hearing. We as a nation benefit when people stand up and take their place in leadership, and certainly we've seen 4 really strong individuals participate in this process today during the hearing. I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Paulson, and of course, he being a home state guy is one of the reasons why I'm so thankful that he was articulate and clear and consistent with the philosophy that our seniors are where some of the hidden gems, some of the hidden jewels are in the workforce. And more importantly, as the employer sitting here amongst the panel, he's proving that it can be done successfully and effectively. And frankly, that actually helps the bottom line and helps his customers. So thank you for your participation in the hearing. To all the other witnesses, I really enjoyed and learned during the earlier part of the hearing. Well, if one of you were giving your opening comments, I thought to myself, and I was telling my staff in the room, these folks are really smart, very engaging, and powerful. And being a part of this committee is highlighted by the number of people who are passionate about aging gracefully and being included in the most important workforce in all of the world. So I thank you for bringing your expertise to bear on the issues that we focused on. I will say that many of the legislative priorities from our good friends that I sincerely think of, Chairman Casey, as a friend, are really focused on making the world and work better. I would disagree, perhaps even vehemently, on the outcome of those legislative priorities, because I think it would actually harm our workforce more than help our workforce. But I do not question the intentions. I certainly am thankful that we live in a country where we could actually have a civil debate, have civil discourse around those priorities and issues that face our nation and the future of this nation. And I look forward to continuing to be a productive member of this committee. I want to thank all the committee members for participating in some form or fashion. I know that Senator Lee provided questions for the record. That is very helpful, and I look forward to seeing the response from the witnesses. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to do what rarely happens, is return my time.
Ranking Member Scott, thanks very much, and I want to thank again our witnesses and the comments of the ranking member about our witnesses were entirely appropriate about how much they contribute, not just to the hearing, but to the larger debate about how we help older workers. For the record, I want to say that if any senator has additional questions for the witnesses or statements to be added, the hearing record will be kept open for 7 days until next Thursday, May the 6th. So thank you all for participating in today's hearing. This concludes our hearing.